When we think about large mega corporations in the United States, our minds tend to go to the tech giants Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Facebook. These companies worth billions, sometimes trillions of dollars, are so large that very few people can actually understand the scale of their operations. Whatever your opinion may be regarding big business, we can all generally agree that although in the United States, big business does have its negatives, even large companies are in constant competition and exist in relatively fluid markets with little to no opportunities for monopolies to exist. Even large oil companies and utilities find themselves competing with one another. Think about your gas stations, ExxonMobil, Marathon, BP, the list goes on. Cell phone giants like T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon. In the US, there are choices, sometimes more limited in some markets, but at the end of the day, consumers have some sort of pick. This brings me to Saudi Aramco, arguably the world's largest company. Its financial sheet mind-blowing, and its power indisputable. Saudi Aramco is 100% owned by the Saudi government, and according to many rumors is valued at nearly $2 trillion. Covered by a shroud of secrecy, its true financial numbers are unknown to the general public. At an approximate market cap of $2.1 trillion, Aramco is larger than the GDP of 95% of the nations on Earth. In fact, only 8 countries have GDPs larger than it. In a part of the world where oil is abundant and easily extracted, Saudi Aramco represents the core of the Saudi economy. Each day in the United States, 20 million barrels of oil are used up by people and companies. Around the world, the thirst for this black gold affects politics, wars, and even geography. Aramco finds itself in a very particular position, holding power like no other company can even dream of, and a complete monopoly on the oil market in Saudi Arabia. Recently, the news of an IPO have made financial headlines, but disagreements in the value of the company and other events like this drone attack have delayed the sale of the company to public foreign investors. In one of the most bizarre IPO deals of all time, Aramco plans to sell only 0.5% of the company, at an evaluation rumored to be between 1.5 trillion and 2.3 trillion. Such values have never before been seen by public investors. For comparison's sake, ExxonMobil has a market cap of nearly 300 billion. Understanding the difference between a million and a billion is hard enough, but a billion and a trillion is almost impossible. You can begin to understand the magnitude of these numbers by visualizing time. Think about this. 1 billion seconds ago, it was 1987. 1 trillion seconds ago, it was 30,000 BC. Saudi Aramco's financial sheet is sheer insanity, and comprehending the magnitude is very difficult. The company has remained private since the late 70s, owned 100% by the government, but a new royal power has set forth a plan to change the landscape of the Saudi economy by diversifying it. Called Saudi Vision 2030, formed 3 years ago by Mohammed bin Salman, a man in the news for a lot of different reasons, Vision 2030 seeks to increase foreign investment in the kingdom along with various other goals aimed at reducing the reliance on oil exports. The IPO is one of many steps in a long journey that hopes to accomplish these goals by 2030. The sheer power of oil can be understood when we look at it through the scope of geopolitics. In the 2002 episode Game Day of The Wire, Detective Leicester Freeman uses a phrase when investigating the dealings of a Baltimore criminal gang to explain the political difficulty of investigating organized crime, saying, "You follow the drugs, you get drug addicts and drug dealers, but you start to follow the money, and you don't know where the heck you're going to end up." The same could be said regarding nations. You follow the money, you get banks and bankers, but you start to follow the oil, you really don't know where you're going to end up. This can be visualized with one simple graph. Just take a look at this chart, which shows the proven oil reserves by size by country. Basically, these are the countries with the most amount of oil. Now let's run down the list. Each of these countries essentially falls into 3 simple categories. We got long-term allies of the US, like Canada, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. These are nations that have had long established relations with the United States and align with its geopolitical goals, for the most part. Then you have countries who have been coerced/convinced into becoming allies through war or protection or alliances. These are countries like Iraq who have been invaded, of course not for the oil but for the weapons that never existed, or countries like Kuwait and the UAE who were protected by the US from this guy. Of course, with that protection came permanent military bases and friendly trade deals, but that's besides the point. Or Libya, whose violent uprise and removal of a dictator was at least partially inspired by American led support and operations. Then we have our last category, nations that are undergoing a process to introduce regime change via organizations such as the famous Christians in Action, or political pressures or embargoes, or the funding of political opposition. These are countries like Iran, who's been under pressure to realign its interests following the fall of the Shah in 1979, Venezuela, who's now currently experiencing heavy sanctions and protests, and Russia, whose rise in power following the 1992 collapse of communism has created a power struggle between itself, China, and the United States. Each of these countries on the top 10 list provide you with insight on the oil market. The Saudi IPO is symbolic as it's indicative of the Saudi seriousness into taking active measures to diversify the country and make it more than just an oil state. American investors and American financial giants like Goldman know that this opportunity to empower a stronger relationship between one of America's most trusted partners in the Middle East. What the future holds for oil is uncertain, but there's no denying that crude will remain an asset paid for by blood and will forever shape not only the world, but the borders we humans place all over it. While some will view this IPO as positive, others will look at this as a financial move, as just another attempt to empower the infamous House of Saud, the ruling royal family that is shrouded in deep secrecy with an estimated net worth in the trillions of dollars.